Good morning and welcome to the lecture number 3 of the course Water Resource Systems Modeling Techniques and Analysis. In the previous lecture, we essentially studied the definition of a system and then looked at various types of systems. Typically, we saw what is meant by a simple system, what is a complex system, then linear and nonlinear systems where principle of proportionality is valid or not, then time variant and time invariant systems. In the time invariant systems, essentially the properties will remain the same across time, and in the time variant systems, several of the parameters will be changing with respect to the time. Then we also saw continuous, discrete and quantized systems. In many of the water resource systems, although the processes are continuous, we may approximate them to be discrete and therefore treat the systems as discrete systems. And in the quantized systems, we may have a time step during which a sudden change in the system occurs, and that is what we call as quantized systems. Then we have lumped systems and distributed parameter systems. In the lumped systems, we lump the various parameters in the sense that the spatial variation of the parameters and the processes are not considered in the lumped systems, whereas in the distributed systems, we do consider the spatial variation of the parameters and the processes. And we have the deterministic and probabilistic systems. In the deterministic system, the same input always provides the same output, whereas in the probabilistic systems, there is a probability associated with an output for a given input. Then we have the stable and unstable systems. In the stable systems, if the input is bounded, then the output is also bounded, whereas in the unstable systems, the systems become unstable if the input is it is bounded, but the output may not be necessarily bounded. So, the output of the system in that sense becomes unstable. So, these are the types of systems that we studied in the previous lecture, and towards the end of the lecture, I introduced a simple problem which we wanted to convert it into a mathematical problem. The physical problem statement we wanted to convert into a mathematical problem. We will start with that now and let us quickly recapitulate what the problem was. It is a simple problem of water quality where we are interested in maintaining the water quality at these two checkpoints, point number 2 and point number 3. This is a stream which receives effluents from two industries, industry and 1 here and industry 2 here with effluent quantity of W1 and effluent quantity of W2 at location 2. If you do not provide any treatment at this location, the DO level was small q2 at location number 2 and small q3 at location number 3. By providing a treatment, appropriate treatment at the industry number 1 and at the industry number 2, we would like to maintain the dissolved oxygen level at a desired level of capital Q2 at location number 2 and at capital Q3 at location number 3. Now, the dissolved oxygen at any location will depend on the amount of stream flow that is coming in, which is the flow, discharge, flow quantity, etc. And it also depends on a large number of climatic factors, for example, the temperature, the relative humidity, the reaeration coefficient and so on. So, there are large number of processes that govern the transport of the load BOD into its translation into the dissolved oxygen at a given point. Let us assume that all of these processes have been taken into account and we have one parameter which gives the amount of DO, dissolved oxygen, that can be enhanced at a particular location by providing a unit treatment at the upstream location. let us say that we treat 1 unit of this effluent quantity W1, then the dissolved oxygen at this location will be enhanced by certain amount. Now, that is what we will define as the parameters A12 and A13. What I mean by that is, each unit of waste load removed at site 1 here enhances the DO level at site 2 at this location by A12, which means 1 unit of waste load you remove, you will get an enhancement of A12 at location 2 and A13 at location 3. Similarly, at 2 you remove 1 unit, then it enhances the DO at 3 by A23. Obviously, it does not affect the location here and nor does it affect the location upstream of that. They will only affect, the treatment will only affect the dissolved oxygen downstream of that particular location. So, A23 is the increase in DO level at site 3 for each unit of waste load removed at site 2. So, this is the physical problem, and then we have to now convert, using this information, we have to now convert it into a mathematical problem. First, let us try to look at what is it that we want to achieve. What we want to achieve in this problem is that we would like to make the treatment levels at industry 1 and industry 2, the sum of the treatment levels or sum of the costs of the treatment levels a minimum, and achieve the desired DO level Q2 at 2 and Q3 at 3. So, from Q2 we want to enhance it to at least Q2 at location 2, and from small Q3 we want to achieve a desired level of Q3 at site 3 by providing the treatments at industry 1 and industry 2, but by providing a minimum treatment, minimum sum of the treatment or minimum cost of the total treatment. So, this is the problem. So, let us look at the conditions that we want to put first. What is the condition? That we want to provide the treatment such that the desired oxygen level Q2 is attained at this location. So, how do we write this? Let us say that x1 is the fraction of effluent removed at site 1, which means W1 was the load that was coming at site 1, x1 fraction has been removed. So, what is the total amount removed? W1 into x1. The total amount that is removed, total amount of waste that is removed is W1 into x1, which means if you remove 10%, it will be 10% of W1 and so on. Similarly, x2 is the fraction of effluent treated at site 2. We will take the cost as C1 x1 and C2 x2. That means, if you want to remove x1 fraction at W1 at the industry 1, the cost associated with that is C1 x1, and if you want to remove x2 fraction at site 2, the cost associated with that is C2 x2, and we want to make the decisions on x1 and x2 such that the total cost is a minimum. Then what is the condition that we want to achieve? You just look at what is the definition of A12. For every unit amount of effluent that is removed from site number 1, you will get an enhancement in the DO of A12 at site number 2. That is the definition of A12. So, you had a load of W1 and you removed a x1 fraction of that. So, the total amount of waste removed is W1 into x1. So, this is the total amount of waste removed at site number 1. For every unit of waste removed at site number 1, you will get an enhancement of A12 into that amount at site number 2. So, the total improvement in DO, dissolved oxygen, at site number 2 is A12 W1 into x1. This is the improvement. And what was the original DO? Original DO was Q2, small q2. So, small q2 plus A12 into W1 into X1 will be the total dissolved oxygen at site number 2 after a treatment of X1 has been given at site number 1. And this dissolved oxygen at site number 2 must be at least equal to what we desire at that point, which is capital Q2. We will write it presently. Similarly, you look at site number 3, dissolved oxygen at site number 3. What is existing before the treatment is small q3 and what we desire is capital Q3. So, starting with small q3, you have provided a treatment of X1 at site number 1, which means the total amount of waste that is removed is W1 into X1. For every unit of waste that you remove at W1, you will get an enhancement of A13 at site number 3. And therefore, the total improvement of DO at site number 3 corresponding to the treatment X1 at site number 1 will be A13 into W1 into X1. So, A13 into W1 into X1 is the improvement at site number 3 corresponding to a treatment at site number 1. Similarly, A23 into W2 X2 is the improvement in the dissolved oxygen at site number 3 for a treatment of X2 at site number 2. And the original DO was Q3. So, small q3 plus the improvement due to treatment at 1 plus the improvement due to treatment at 2. This will be the total dissolved oxygen after the treatment. So, we got the total dissolved oxygen after the treatment at site number 1 and site number 2, where the treatments are given, and we got the dissolved oxygen level at site number 2 and site number 3 corresponding to these treatments. Now, this total dissolved oxygen that you get after the treatment must be at least equal to the desired dissolved oxygen, which is capital Q2. So, that is what we write. This is the dissolved oxygen at site number 2 after the treatment X1 has been provided at site number 1. So, this is Q2 plus A12 W1 X1 and this should be at least equal to capital Q2. Now, capital Q2 is the desired DO level. So, this is the desired level. At site number 2. Similarly, this is desired at site number 3. So, these are the two major constraints that we will be talking about. These constraints arise from our management condition that we want to achieve a minimum desired level of Q2 here and Q3 at site number 3. Then there may be some technological limits. For example, you may not be able to say that you treat 100% of the effluent. It may not be technologically feasible. Therefore, we may want to put an upper limit of the treatment levels. So, X1 should be less than or equal to an upper limit, X2 should be less than or equal to an upper limit. These can be different for the two sites. Then we may want to put a minimum level. Typically, we put 30-35% of the treatment level as a minimum treatment level that is mandatory. So, depending on the problems, you may fix X min and X max. So, you are making decisions on X1 and X2 such that they vary in this range and such that their cost is the minimum, total cost is the minimum and such that they satisfy these two conditions. So, this is how the original physically stated problem has been converted into a mathematical problem. There are a few things that you must note here. What are the actual decisions that you are making? The decisions that we will be interested in are what is the optimal value of X1 and what is the optimal value of X2. Look at all the other parameters. Are they known? Q2 is known, which is the original dissolved oxygen level. A12, which is a parameter which indicates the improvement in the water quality at site number 2 corresponding to a unit treatment at site number 1 is known or can be determined, and therefore, for as far as this problem is concerned, we will take it as a constant. Similarly, A13 is a constant, A23 is a constant. W1 is data, what is the amount of effluent that is coming in, this is known. W2 is the data, what is the amount of water effluent, that is a waste load that is coming in, that is known. C1, which is the cost coefficient, that is known. C2 cost coefficient, that is known. So, the only unknowns, and similarly the desired levels Q2 and Q3 are also known, and these technological limits we are fixing. Similarly, the minimum levels we are fixing. So, all of these other variables in this problem are all known. We are making decisions on x1 and x2. So, x1 and x2 are only unknown in this particular problem. So, this is how we converted a physically stated problem into a mathematical statement, and this is an optimization problem. We will see what is an optimization problem, what is a simulation problem, etc. presently in today's class. But essentially what you must understand is that a physically stated problem has been converted into a mathematical statement of the problem. This is called as a mathematical formulation of the optimization problem. And so, in most of the situations, in almost all the situations, we understand the problem physically and state the problem in linguistic terms first, and then convert these problems into mathematical statements such as these. And this becomes the mathematical formulation of the problem. Starting with such a mathematical formulation, we will provide data. For example, what are the values of C1, what are the values of Q2, capital Q2, A13, A12, A23, etc. We provide the data, and then we should be able to solve for what is the optimal value of x1 and x2. How to solve for is a different question we will study during the course of this particular subject. Okay, so this is just a broad idea of problem formulations. So, as long as you understand the physical statements of the problem, you must be able to convert that into a mathematical statement. We will just go through some broad basics of what is optimization and what is simulation. In optimization, we are looking for optimal values of a particular function. By optimal, I mean it may be a minimum value or a maximum value. Let us say that you are looking at, in the previous problem that I just discussed, we may be looking at minimization of the cost, or in certain situations you may be looking at maximization of the flood control benefit, or maximization of the hydropower, or minimization of the water pollution in some sense, DO deficit, let us say DO deficit you would like to minimize at certain locations, and so on. So, there is always a physical quantity which you may want to minimize or maximize. So, you have a function which needs to be optimized. Then you may have certain conditions that you want to satisfy. While you are optimizing them, you want to optimizing the function that we just defined, you may want to satisfy certain conditions. These conditions will define what are called as the constraints. So, you have a function which has to be optimized, and you have a set of conditions that need to be satisfied that are called as the constraints. So, in the optimization, let us have a look at it. We may say maximize f of x. Now, when I say maximize, you can also talk about minimization problem. So, in this example, I am saying it is maximization problem. So, maximize f of x subject to g j of x less than or equal to 0. Now, this x is a vector of decision variables. So, I may write x is equal to a vector of x1, x2, x3, etc., xn, n decision variables. And you may have m constraints. So, Gj of x less than or equal to 0, j is equal to 1, 2, etc. m. So, these are m number of constraints. In the previous example, for example, you just look at it. This is your f of x. Capital X consists of two variables x1 and x2. These are the decision variables, and these are the two constraints, or if you include these also as constraints, these are the 4 constraints 1, 2, 3, 4. I say if you include with a purpose, because in many of the situations the bounds need not be included as explicit constraints, but however, we will take them as constraints for the time being. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 constraints, 2 variables, and this is the objective function. So, this is what we are relating. There is an objective function, there are decision variables, there are m number of constraints. So, this is how typically an optimization problem is stated. You have an objective function which has to be either minimized or maximized. There are a set of decision variables. In our case, the decision variables were x1 and x2, the treatment at industry number 1 and the treatment at industry number 2. Then you have a set of constraints, m number of constraints. Now, the decision variables are the variables for which decisions are required, very simple. That means, how much is the treatment at industry number 1, how much is the treatment at industry number 2, these were the decisions. In other situations, if you are talking about a reservoir operation problem, you may be talking about the decisions as what is the amount of release during month June, what is the amount of release during month July, and so on. In water allocation problems, you may talk about allocation to hydropower, allocation to irrigation, allocation to flood control as 3 different decision variables. So, the decision variables are the variables on which you would like to make decisions. Now, in this simple statement of problem, this general statement of the problem, as you can see, the complexity of the problem increases or changes with respect to the nature of the function itself. It may be highly nonlinear function, or it may be a simple linear function, and so on. So, the complexity of the problem varies depending on the nature of the function. Then you may also have a set of quite complex constraints. They may be highly nonlinear in nature, they may be interactive in nature, and so on. So, that also defines the complexity of the problem, and also the number of variables and the number of constraints and so on, all of this will determine the size and also the complexity of the problem. So, this is what we do in optimization. There is a function which is, we call it as objective function. We want to minimize or maximize. There are a set of conditions, and then there are a set of decision variables on which you would like to make up the decision. Simulation as against the optimization will not provide you with one solution, one optimal solution. Generally, we use simulation when we want to look at several alternatives. Let us say that you have a large river basin, and then let me draw that and then explain what we mean by simulation. Let us say that you have a river basin like this, and then you would like to develop this river basin. The questions that you may be interested in answering is, if I put a reservoir here and a reservoir here and a reservoir here and a reservoir here, is the benefit that I am likely to get the maximum, or should I be putting the reservoir at this point, at some other point here, at some other point here, some other point here, etc. So, among virtually infinite number of possibilities, you would like to explore which combination is better in some sense. So, you are actually screening alternatives. There are large number of alternatives, and you want to screen which among them is the best. For example, do I need to have 20 reservoirs here, or only 15 is all right, or 13 is all right, 12 is all right, and if 12 is all right, at which locations we should have? or I may not want the reservoirs in big dams, through big dams. I may just want to use the water through lift irrigation. So, some lift irrigation somewhere, some groundwater somewhere, some reservoir somewhere, and so on. So, there are large number of alternatives that you would like to explore. In such situations, it is easier, handy and feasible to go with simulation rather than optimization. So, the simulation essentially helps us with checking alternatives, and in simulation we mimic the behavior of the system. For example, we put those dams and then run the flow through those things and then see how the system actually behaves in practice. So, the physical behavior of the system is mimicked or imitated mathematically in simulation. We also use simulation to answer what if type of questions. For example, we do not actually put the dam, we say what if we put a reservoir here, what happens to our downstream flows, or what happens to hydropower generation, how much of irrigation can be met, and so on. So, the simulation is typically used for answering what if type of questions. And as I just said, large water resource systems, which are extremely complex in terms of their interactions among various components and so on. So, when you have large complex systems, simulation is a handy tool to providing how well the system performs. So, in terms of the performance evaluation of the system, simulation is a handy tool. And as I just said, that number of scenarios exist, and therefore, you want to do the screening of alternatives, screening of scenarios. So, rather than looking at just one optimal solution, you may be interested in a range of solutions from which you would like to pick up. In such situations, simulation becomes very useful. Through simulation, let us say that you run the simulation many times with different types of inputs and so on. So, while we may not be formally doing optimization, but it is possible for you to get near optimal solutions through simulation. And in water resource systems, typically we use simulation in several situations. For example, analysis of river basin development alternatives, just now I gave the example. You may want to put lift irrigation schemes, you may want to put reservoirs, you may want to put groundwater utilization points, you may want to have a conjunctive use at certain points, you may want to have recycling of water at certain points and so on. So, the large river basins you want to develop with several alternatives. In such situations, you may want to use simulation. Then large multi-reservoir optimization, multi-reservoir operation problems. Although they can be formally optimized, because the systems are large and systems are complex, it is better to go with simulation first to get an insight into the behavior of the system itself first, and then go with the formal optimization. Then generation of alternatives or trade-offs of water allocations. That means, between hydropower and flood control, between hydropower and irrigation, between one city with another city and so on. So, water allocations among various users, you want to provide trade-offs. If I put more water here, what happens to, how does the other one suffer, and so on. So, you want to develop trade-offs between among water users. Then conjunctive use of surface and groundwater, how much of surface water you would like to use, how much of groundwater you would like to use across time periods in a year, across time periods in a decade and so on, such that the system becomes sustainable. Such questions can be best answered through simulation. So, we just saw the difference between optimization and simulation. Typically, we use optimization and simulation both in most water resource problems, and there are situations where we use both optimization as well as simulation in a sort of interactive manner. We simulate the system and then run through an optimization, get an optimal value, look at the performance of the system, rerun the simulation and so on. So, simulation optimization combination methods are also available. So, now onwards we will for some time we will focus on optimization, which is a formal method of obtaining optimal values of a function. So, we will start with the simplest methods and then proceed on to more complex problems of optimization. What we mean by optimization? Let us say that you have a function f of x. We will start with the simplest of function of a single variable f of x. Now, f of x we want to get either the maximum or a minimum, that is the optimization problem. You may have a range over which x varies or over which f of x is defined or over which you are interested in. So, while the function may be defined over the entire range, your interest may be only between certain values of x, x1 and x2. Within this given range, you would like to check where the minimum of the function occurs, where the maximum of the function occurs and this is the optimization problem. There are classical ways of getting this these optimal values, and we will start with that is optimization with methods of calculus. We will start with the simplest of the functions, that is function of a single variable. Let us say f of x is a function of a single variable x defined in the range x between a and b. This is x is equal to a and this is x is equal to b, and the function nature is something like this. So, between a and b, this is the behavior of the function. The function attains certain value, certain maximum value here and certain minimum value here, again picks up, again attains a maximum value, comes down, reaches a minimum value and so on, like this. Now, these peaks here x1, x3, x5, x6 etc., where the maximum value has occurred. In fact, at x5 maximum value may not have occurred, but a change in the slope has occurred here, as well as a change in the slope has occurred at x2 and x4 and so on. Now, these are the points where the maximum has occurred, x1, x3 and x6 are called as the local maximum values. So, there is a local maximum at this point, local maximum at this point, local maximum at this point and so on. At the local maximum, what is happening here? Let us say you look at x1. The value of the function is higher than any other value in the neighborhood. So, if you go slightly to the left, the function value decreases, slightly to the right, the function value decreases. So, f of x1 is greater than f of x1 minus delta x1, which means slightly to the left. Also, it is greater than f of x1 plus delta x1, slightly to the right. So, at the local maximum, the functional value will be more than the function values at its neighborhoods. That is how the local maximum is obtained. Similarly, at the local minimum, you look at x2 here. The function value will be smaller than the function values at the neighborhood. Similarly, here the function value at x4 will be smaller than the function values at the neighborhood. So, we write that as f of x2 is less than f of x2 minus delta x2, and also it is less than f of x2 plus delta x2, which means you go slightly to the left or slightly to the right, the function value will be more at those points. Now, you look at the point x5. Alright, one more interesting feature is whenever we have a local maximum or local minimum, what is happening? The slope was in this direction when we came from point A, slope kept on reducing and then slope becomes 0 at this point. Similarly, at x2 the slope becomes 0, at x3 slope becomes 0, x4 slope is 0, x6 slope is 0. So, at local maxima and local minima, the slope is 0. slope of the function, that is dy by dx, or f dash of x will be 0. The first derivative of the function will be 0 at this location. Look at what is happening at x 5. The slope is 0 here. However, it is neither a maximum nor a minimum, in the sense that in the immediate neighborhood of x 5, the function value has not changed, or the function value is not less on either side, making x 5 the maximum, or it is neither more on either side, making x 5 the minimum. So, at x 5, although the slope is 0, the function value is neither a maximum nor a minimum, neither a local maximum nor a local minimum. Such points are called as saddle points. So, at the saddle point, the slope of the function is 0, but value of the function is lower on one side and higher on the other side, and vice versa. So, at f of x 5, you can see f of x 5 is less than x 5 minus delta x 5, and there is also less than x 5 plus the function value at x 5 plus delta x 5. So, we saw 2 points now, 2 major observations. One is that at local minimum and local maximum, the slope changes and slope becomes 0. And then we have what is called as a saddle point, where even if the slope is 0, it does not correspond to a minimum or a maximum. Now, we got what are called as local maxima. These are also called as relative maxima. So, x 1, x 3, x 6 are the local maxima. The maximum among all such local maxima is called as a global maximum. That means, in this range between a and b, x 6 is the highest among all the local maxima, namely x 1, x 3 and x 6. Among all these 3, x 6 is the highest, and that is called as a global maximum. Similarly, between x 2 and x 4, x 2 is the lower among the 2 minima. So, x 2 is the global minimum. So, when we are talking about global maximum and global minimum, we are talking within a specified range. That means, within the range a and b, x 2 is the global minimum and x 6 is the global maximum within this range. Now, we will go into an important aspect of optimization with calculus, namely the concept of convex and concave functions. Remember, we are talking about functions of a single variable, and we have just defined what are called as the local maxima and local minima, and then the global maxima and global maximum and global minimum. Global maximum is the maximum among all the local maxima. If you have a function where there is exactly one minimum, which means the local minimum that you obtain is also the global minimum. Let us look at a function. Let us say that you have a function like this here, and you get a minimum point at this location, and this is the range that you are talking about. In this range, the function is something like this. There is only one minimum here, and this minimum also corresponds to the global minimum. So, the local minimum also happens to be global minimum. What is the feature of this function? Let us say that you join any 2 points on the curve. This is a functional curve. Let us say you join any 2 points. This straight line will be always above the curve. You take any 2 other points like this, you want to join this point and this point, this will still be above the curve. So, you join any 2 points on the curve, that will be always above the curve. This is a feature, not the definition. This is a feature of the problem, a feature of the function, and such functions are called as convex functions, where the local minimum is also equal to is also the same as the global minimum. Let us say that there are 2 points A and B, and you have joined, and this point has to be always above the curve itself. So, let us see what is the condition for this. This is x1 and x2. You take any one point in between, that will be alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2, where alpha is a scalar between 0 and 1. So, this is alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2. What is the function value corresponding to x1? It is f of x1 at this location. The function value corresponding to x2 is f of x2. The straight line point corresponding to this location, which is alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2, is alpha f of x1 plus 1 minus alpha f of x2, that is on the straight line. The function value corresponding to this is f of alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2, that is a function value corresponding to this. So, what we are saying is that this value, which is on this straight line, namely alpha f of x1 plus 1 minus alpha f of x2, must be always greater than f of alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2. So, this point is always lower than this point. That is what we call it as convex function. So, for the convex function, the local minimum is also equal to the global minimum, and the straight line that is joining any 2 points will always lie above the curve itself. So, we use this condition and write this as f of alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2, which is, I am talking about this point here. The function value corresponding to this point must be always lower than the corresponding point on the straight line joining any of these 2 points, would be less than alpha f of x1 plus 1 minus alpha f of x2 for all values of alpha between 0 and 1. Now, this is, if it is less than, then it is called as strictly convex. If it is less than or equal to, then it is still a convex function, but not strictly convex. However, I repeat, this is a feature of the convex function. The definition of the convex function is a strictly convex function, the second derivative d square f by dx square is greater than 0 for all values of x in that particular range. So, d square f by dx square or the second derivative of the function, if it is strictly positive in the range, then the function is strictly convex in that particular range. If it is greater than or equal to 0, that is d square f by dx square is greater than or equal to 0 in the range that we are interested in, then it is called as a convex function. What we just did with the convex functions, the same thing is true of the concave functions. In the concave functions, the local maximum will correspond to the global maximum. So, there is only one maximum value here, and any line that is joining between A and B, any 2 points, you join any 2 points on the curve, that line will be always below the curve itself. And using the same argument that we used just now for the concave functions, convex functions, I am sorry, we can write this as f of alpha x1 plus 1 minus alpha x2 will be greater than alpha f of x1 plus 1 minus alpha f of x2 for all values of alpha between 0 and 1. For a strictly concave function, d square f by dx square is less than 0 in that particular range. So, in the range, if you have in the particular range of interest, if you have d square f by dx square strictly negative, then it is called as a strictly concave function. Whereas, if d square f by dx square is less than or equal to 0, then it is called as it is called as a concave function. Remember, convex functions correspond to minima and concave functions correspond to maxima. So, the second derivative being negative corresponds to maximum values, second derivative being positive corresponds to minimum values. So, these are the important points that one must remember in this. Now, look at a straight line. Let us say that y is equal to mx plus c, a simple straight line equation. What happens to the second derivative? The second derivative is 0. So, the straight line is both a concave function as well as a convex function. Now, the other 2 points that I already mentioned is, for the convex functions there is only one maximum in the range that you are considering, and that maximum also corresponds to the global maximum. So, local maximum is also the same as local global maximum in terms of in the concave functions. Similarly, local minimum is also the same as global minimum in the case of convex functions. The sum of strictly convex functions is strictly convex. So, if you have two strictly convex functions, the sum of them is also a strictly convex function. Similarly, sum of strictly concave functions is also strictly concave. Let us say you have a concave function like this, which corresponds to a global maximum, and you take a mirror image of this, or f x is plotted like this, which results in a concave function. You take minus f of x, which plots like this. This corresponds to a local minimum, which is also equal to, is the same as global minimum. So, f of x is, if it is a concave function, minus f of x is a convex function, and vice versa. In fact, maximization of f of x will mean the same as minimization of minus f of x. Both the optimum values correspond to the same point on the x axis. Another important point is, if f of x is a convex function and alpha is any constant, then alpha f of x is a convex function if alpha is greater than 0, and alpha f of x is a concave function if alpha is less than 0, which means if you multiply it with a positive quantity, then you still get a convex function. If you multiply with a negative quantity, you will get a concave function, and the same is true if you replace this with concave, this will become concave and this becomes convex. So, these are the features of concave functions and convex functions. Why are we interested in the definitions of concave and convex functions? If you know that the function that you are optimizing is in fact a convex or a concave function, and if you are looking at the minimum value or the maximum value, and then you have methods of isolating or identifying local minimum, you will be sure that the local minimum also corresponds to the global minimum in that range, if it is in fact a concave convex function. And that is where the notions of convex functions and concave functions will be of use. Now, look at what is happening to our original function here. So, this is the function with which we started, x1, x3, x6 were local maximum, and x2 and x4 were local minima. At all these points, local maxima as well as local minima, the slope is 0. So, if you draw a tangent here at this point, the slope will be 0. Similarly, at x6 the slope is 0, x3 slope is 0, and so on. These points at which the slopes are 0 are called as the stationary points. So, at stationary points the slope of a function is 0. So, we write that as df by dx is equal to 0. We are talking about functions of single variables, and therefore, we write it as df by dx is 0 at x naught. Then x is equal to x naught is a stationary point. So, what we are looking at is, in a particular range, we want to get the local maxima and the local minima. This is the optimization problem that we are looking at. So, the first condition that we need to examine is whether the slope is 0 at that particular point. This is called as a necessary condition. So, the necessary condition for a function to have an optimal value at a particular point is that the slope of the function at that particular point must be 0. So, df by dx at x is equal to x naught is 0. This is a necessary point, a necessary condition. So, in the necessary condition, you got slope is 0 at this point, at this point, at this point, and so on. So, what is the sufficiency condition then? Now, the sufficiency condition is if d square f by dx square is greater than 0, if it is valid for all x in that range, then what happens? It becomes a convex function. So, if d square f by dx square is greater than 0 for all x in that range, we just saw that in that range, if it is greater than 0, then we have only one minimum, and that also becomes the global maximum, the global minimum. So, if d square f by dx square is greater than 0 for all x, f of x is convex and the stationary point itself is a global minimum. Similarly, if d square f by dx square is less than 0 for all x, f of x is concave and stationary point is also a global maximum. Now, it may so happen that you may get d square f by dx square is equal to 0, then further investigation needs to be carried out. Okay, let us just go through it again. What we are interested in is that within a particular range between a and b, we want to examine whether the point x is equal to x naught is a minimum or a maximum, and in fact, whether it is a local minimum or a global minimum, local maximum or a global maximum. First, we examine the slope of the function. So, slope of the function at x is equal to x naught, if it is 0, that means that it may either correspond to minimum or correspond to maximum, or perhaps may not correspond to either of them, as it happens in the case of x 5 here. So, if we have exactly one minimum, that means if in this range the function behaves as a convex function, then we get that particular point change of slope, and that itself corresponds to the global minimum. Similarly, if in this range it behaves as a concave function, then the function point corresponds to a local maximum, which is also the global maximum. However, you may get different maxima and different minima like this. So, you may get slope is equal to 0 here, slope is equal to 0 here, etc., and the second derivative may be positive at some point, may be negative at some points, and so on. So, if you look at the second derivative, it may be positive at certain of these points, which are the stationary points. It may be negative at certain points, which are the which correspond to the local maxima. So, we may capture all of these local maxima and local minima by looking at the second derivative. Let us say that the second derivative also becomes 0 at some of these stationary points. Remember, these are the stationary points x 1, x 2, x 3, etc. These are all x 5, x 6, they are all stationary points, because the slope of the point at those locations, slope of the function at those locations is 0, and therefore, they correspond to the stationary points. Now, some of these stationary points may correspond to local maxima, some of them correspond to local minima, and some of them may correspond to saddle points, and so on. So, these are examined based on the second derivative. We will see how we use the second derivative as sufficiency conditions, And what happens if the second derivative also becomes 0? What do we do in the cases where the second derivative also becomes 0? So, we will extend this problem and then see how we use the second derivative as sufficiency condition. So, the necessary condition for a function to have an optimum value at a particular point is that the slope at that particular point of the function must be equal to 0. So, in today's class essentially we started with definition of what we mean by a local minima, local maxima, local minimum, local maximum and so on, and then looked at how we identify a convex function and a concave function. Remember, the definition for a concave function is that d square f by dx square must be negative, and d square f by dx square, if it is positive, then it is a concave function, and the convex functions will give you the local. We will just go through that once, so that we refresh our memory correctly. For example, in the convex functions, we always get the global minimum, and in the concave functions, we always get the global maximum. So, the notion of convex functions and the concave functions are useful because if you know that a function that you are optimizing is in fact either a convex function or a concave function, then the local minima or the local maxima that you get are in fact the global minima and global maxima. The necessary condition for a function to have an optimal value at a given point is that the slope at that point must be 0, or the first derivative of the function with respect to the variable must be equal to 0. We are treating functions of single variable. Then we go on to the second derivative to see if the stationary point is in fact a local minimum or a local maximum. And then in the next class, we will also see what happens if the second derivative is also 0. That means, the first derivative is 0, as a necessary condition the slope has changed. Then we look at the second derivative and decide whether it is a local minimum or local maximum, depending on whether the second derivative is positive or negative. What happens if the second derivative is also 0 there? We will continue this discussion in the next class. So, we are talking about optimization using methods of calculus of a function of a single variable now. We will continue the discussion in the next class. Thank you for your attention.